Today, we're joined by Sean and Dave, the founders and developers at Pillbug Interactive. Thank you both for chatting with us today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourselves and a little bit about Pillbug?
Kick us off, Sean.
Okay, cool. So, yeah, I'm Sean, and I'm a lecturer at Swansea University in computer science. And Pillbug is like a very small games company that we run together.
Yeah, and I'm Dave. I'm a lecturer in creative writing at the University of South Wales. And it's nice to be called a founder, although I think it's a little unfair because Sean founded Pillbug Interactive, and I didn't join until maybe, was it a full year into Pillbug's life, Sean? Is that fair to say?
No, well, because
A little
we
less than that?
met at Works Crucible like about a month after I started the company. So
God,
then
was
how
it a
long was
month?
that?
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Mhm.
Yeah, it feels like a long time ago now.
Yeah, but then so you didn't join then until the end of that process, right?
Yeah.
So that would have
So
been 6
maybe it
months.
was only like, top 6 months before I joined. Okay.
Mhm.
But, I wasn't there for the first 6 months. And those were, as we're probably about to chat about, really, those were a big 6 months for Pillbug.
Were you actively looking to bring someone on board at that point, Sean, or was that just a happy accident that happened? You both got talking and a relationship came to be.
Yeah, it was. I think it was a happy accident. I wasn't looking for that. So it probably worth explaining. So we're both lecturers, and we met at this. What do you even call the Welsh Crucible?
It is like why it's named a crucible, isn't it? It's a way of getting people to mix and meet together that might not otherwise, from lots of different disciplines, but also different universities across Wales. There are different crucible programs across the UK. This was specifically for Welsh universities to kind of not like exactly what Sean and I did, but not far from it in terms of just meeting together and chatting and talking about our different disciplines and research and seeing what comes out of it. And for us, obviously, a kind of collaboration in the form of computer games kind of came about. But obviously, lots of people met and formed other research collaborations in all kinds of fields, in all kinds of directions. So, yeah, that's kind of what I'd say Crucible is. But so, Sean, how did you approach me? Because I think it was that way around, wasn't it? I was the one that was courted.
Yeah. Well, I guess we all had to give these talks at the start, and I talked about my games company, and I think you talked about board games, and then that's how we started talking. And I think what was quite interesting was that, for me, games was a kind of a side hustle, or it still is, obviously. I just started the company, and so Dave was publishing books, writing, and I was kind of interested in how that worked in a kind of similar way, because you were making publishing books and making money that way, and I was kind of publishing a game, and I thought that was quite similar. And then at some point you asked if you could join.
Oh, you have it that way around. Okay, yeah, that's fine. Yeah. It's like any good relationship, we remember it differently. But yeah, I mean, I think we both had to give these presentations saying who we were, and kind of, as with any good presentation, it had a bit of the kind of info dump of what we actually did, but then we tried desperately to insert some personality into that, and you kind of did it through this amazing experience you were right then having with the first Pillbug game, and I tried to do it with a bit of board games, chit chat. So, we kind of found each other through a kind of shared interest of games, and I think we both. I was immediately in awe of what you'd have managed to do with your first computer game, and we just got talking, and it seemed kind of interesting because I immediately assumed that you would want another coder, and I think you pretty quickly said no, that's actually not what you wanted or needed at this time. So that kind of was a surprise to me, and actually meant that it felt like I might be able to add something to Pillbug.
Yeah, I guess because I was always thinking, so before then I was doing everything on my own, which is a lot to do. So it's interesting, people who aren't coders are always surprised by that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas people who are coders kind of understand that, well, yeah, you've got that covered. So I had that covered, so I don't need another, I don't, in fact, it'd make it more difficult if someone was getting in my code, to be honest. So that was that really.
As you mentioned, obviously you're both lecturers. That's a pretty hefty full-time vocation that's going to take up a lot of your time. Was there a specific catalyst that prompted you to want to start an indie game studio on top of doing that full time?
So I guess like I didn't plan to start a company would be the first thing, is that wasn't what I was planning to do. I started making games like I was doing my PhD actually, so probably about 10 12 years ago maybe. I time isn't
time
like,
yeah
who knows? Yeah, like but sometime in the past I kind of started making games, and like that was just because I realized I had the skills to do it and that I loved games. And I just tried, and I started making games actually with other people on my course who were doing their PhD at the same time, and we made some stuff but never really quite finished it. And then I did something on my own, which was like this web game, this weird kind of life sim web game, and like a huge number of people played it, and it did really well. And it wasn't, I don't even think you can call it a game. It did so well it got hacked, I remember. And then someone gave me 20 quid. So this was back in like around Minecraft had just launched. So like people were experimenting with this idea of, I'm going to release my game now, and here's a little button for you to click on and give us a donation. And so that to me was like, oh, someone's given me 20 quid. I feel really guilty about this. And like, it was just this amazing thing that someone gave me money for doing a thing that way, like doing something that was basically a hobby. And then I just got hooked at that kind of, in some ways, the marketing side, or the getting people to play it. It was just watching people play a game, and that experience of creating something and then seeing someone play it. And then I don't know how to describe that in a nutshell, but that's the thing that got me hooked. Then I was doing lots of other games kind of without the thought of starting a company. But then I got made redundant, like maybe a few years after that. And I got made redundant in a way that was quite hard for me. So it was a year that was in terms of like my job, I was a research assistant and kind of applying for lectureships. I'd got like a 4-star paper, which is like as good a paper as you can publish, as far as the academics measure things like that. And I got an award for teaching at the university. And yet still, I was told there was no business case to keep me employed. And so I was like, I'm going to go do something on my own. I can just tutor some people, and I'm going to try this game thing out. And so I really pushed to make a game that I could sell, which was intelligent design. I was lucky enough to get a job. I got an opportunity in computer science, which was a different department. So like I only ended up being unemployed for like a month. But in that month, I kind of finished the game, and then I slowly was ticking away at it. This was back when you couldn't just put a game on Steam. You had to go through a green light process. So I got through that green light process, which was quite difficult back then. And then I was like, I need to start a company, because suddenly I'm going to be liable if I start selling stuff on Steam, there's like these tax forms and all this other stuff. And it's like, I really need to start taking this seriously. Otherwise I'm going to be in a bad position if it all goes wrong. So yeah, that's the reason I did it. So not really planned. It just kind of happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we kind of almost pretty much covered why or how I joined the company, but I suppose the kind of the why I jumped at that opportunity. I mean, maybe that's a no-brainer. Maybe people are jumping at those kinds of opportunities at the time, but for me, it was something I had to think quite long and hard about, because obviously, like you say, like lecturing is quite a full-on job. I already had, kind of Sean mentioned, a side hustle in some respects, writing books. So I was like, do I need another thing to be doing? Do I need another kind of responsibility, or, things that can kind of eat up time, which Pillbug definitely does, as rewarding as it is. And I think for me, it was what made me jump at the opportunity was what Sean was saying, what we were saying earlier about, Sean needed or wanted someone to do a lot of the stuff that felt pretty safely within my wheelhouse already. Obviously the stories for the games, that was really an exciting opportunity to kind of try new challenges as a writer, but also kind of more of the development side, and to an extent the marketing side too, and kind of try and learn a lot and see stuff from a different perspective as well. With computer games, I mean, I'd have always played computer games, but never really seen them as kind of a direction to take my writing or to be creative in. And suddenly there was just this open door into that world, and it felt like a really great thing to kind of at least poke my head and see what was going on. It's definitely been eye-opening, and I've learned a lot from doing that. But yeah, we would both be the first to say that it's a demanding thing to do alongside a day job.
Yeah, absolutely. There are times, like when you're launching a game in particular, where I guess you guys have heard of crunch and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think as much as we try not to, there are times where we end up doing it. I think that'd be fair to say, Dave.
Yeah, we have like mini crunches, maybe crisps. I don't know what the
Yeah.
smaller version of a crunch is, like a crackle or a pop. I don't know. But yeah, we definitely have a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I end up taking leave to do, if I have like a lot of coding to do, I'll take some time off work, which usually is fine. I enjoy it. Like I do, like you've got to enjoy the process, because the thing that you get in the end, like it might not, you're not guaranteed, even if you do everything right, that you're going to get something rewarding in terms of like money or whatever. You don't know. I do enjoy coding. Like I just love coding. And with my job as a lecturer now, I don't get as much time to code in my day job as I used to. So this gives me a way of doing that. And I do it, like, that's something I just enjoy doing. But yeah, it's work. And then it's easy to kind of forget that sometimes, until like you've been doing it for a month and you realize, oh, I haven't actually had a rest in like a month. I'm just like been working I don't see it as working because it's not my day job that I get paid for, but it totally is.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if I could expand a bit, Dave, on the comments you made about narrative design and just how much it differs to write a traditional prose book compared to a game. I'm assuming you don't just write out a story as you would and then chunk it up. How different is that process?
It's very different, and I think something that whenever I get a student who's on one of my creative writing course ask me about writing for games, I feel slightly, imposter syndrome comes up a little bit, because obviously it's not, writing for games is a whole area in of itself, a creative and academic area, and I am just kind of dipping a toe into it, in the Pillbug context. It's easy to for someone to assume that you're an expert in it, but and I certainly don't feel that way. I can talk about my own experience, which I'm certainly happy to do, but it is I feel it's very different, and I think you have to respect the difference of forms in that way as a writer, and not assume just because you can do one that you will automatically be able to do the other. That said, I think a lot of the skills are transferable, to use that kind of awful buzzword. They do, and the one that immediately springs to mind is that when you're writing prose, if you're a big fan of writing dialogue, then that skill transfers quite nicely to computer games, because unless you're writing some massive RPG with tomes of lore strewn around the rooms that characters walk through, the vast majority of what you're going to be doing is writing dialogue between characters for scripted moments, for cutscenes, for whatever. And as with prose dialogue, one of the skills that we kind of develop as writers is a sense of economy in dialogue, because unlike what I'm doing right now, which is giving you a really lengthy, long-winded paragraph length answer, people don't generally talk that way. People interrupt each other, things happen, conversations move on in different directions. And prose kind of represents that and replicates that in kind of different ways. So you kind of learn to be economic, and then create, one thing that I immediately found with writing computer games was that economy gets ratcheted up to 11. It's like, it's really extreme economy. And I think that's something that prose writers will find if they come into computer games, is that, that space that you were used to kind of filling is much, much tighter. And I enjoyed that. Like, I enjoyed that process of like relearning or readapting a skill that I had felt quite comfortable with for some time, and then doing it in a different program, because obviously I'm a slave to Microsoft Word in many respects. But what we do in Pillbug games, in the most recent Pillbug game, we've used Inc, is it, Sean? I see Inc is the system.
Inc is the system, Inkle is the company.
Thank you. Yeah, and those are the guys who made 80 Days, and they've just got a new one out. A friend was telling me, and I've forgotten the name.
I've forgotten the name too.
But we'll be streaming that at some point soon, I'm sure.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
But
yeah, I'm not. It's not coming. It's not going to come to me. I've accepted that already. But that's going to niggle at Sean. But all I want to say briefly about that is that just it felt a bit like as close to coding as I'm ever really going to get for Pillbug, because whilst it was a system that replicated a word processor in some ways, actually also replicated a coding language in others. And I'm sure Sean will remember having to kind of help me through that process. And it's a good job he's a lecturer, because he was very patient with me. The short answer, I suppose, is same but different, which I enjoyed.
Cool, that was interesting. Pillbug currently has 3 titles to its name: Intelligent Design, Cycle 28, and Making It Home. These games are very obviously different from one another, and they each explore different genres and mechanics. Can I ask what drives your decision making when you open up that design process?
Yeah, you can ask. And then trying to think how we do that. Everyone says that to us, right? It absolutely is true. And
it's also not the best. I was just going to say quickly, it's also probably not the best business decision. If someone was to ask me, to begin with, I've noticed our games are very different. And that stands out because a lot of companies don't do that, and a lot of studios don't do that. Like, if they have a success with a type of game, they will make games within that field again and again and again for, and to capitalize on that success. And I understand that, but we don't do that, Sean. So why don't we do that?
I think part to do with what we talked about before, which is we're doing this. I feel like if we're going to be slaves to that kind of thinking, I don't think I'd be as interested to be doing it alongside a job. I feel like, even though at the same time, I think we both are, we're not naive enough to think that we don't have to consider a market. There's no point doing it if we're not trying to make some money to pay for the company and eventually our time. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know. In some ways, I don't know why we don't do that, but also I just feel we like the creative freedom that running Pillbug gives us. And so we don't want to kind of limit ourselves that way. Is that fair, Dave? Am I
I think that's right. I think it is essentially every time we've come to the what's next kind of stage for Pillbug, I always feel like it's Sean, it's you saying, well, I've always wanted to make a game like X, and that's always different from the previous game.
One reason it's difficult to answer, or we think a lot about it, is because we've only actually done that once. Intelligent Design was a sequel to that web game that was really popular. So I absolutely did the thing where I just remade the game into 3D. And actually, there's going to be a common theme here. Is that Intelligent Design, I made that to learn how to make 3D games, to learn how to learn Unity. So that was my goal with that project, was to learn Unity. Cycle 28, which I started working on before Dave joined, my goal was to learn how to make a game that feels good. That for me, the goal of that was to learn how to make an action game. So Intelligent Design, one of the biggest criticisms of it is there's not much player feedback, and you don't feel connected to what's going on. And in some ways, that's part of the design, is that you're meant to feel like you're just watching a fish tank. And there's some reasons behind that. But in some ways, it's a little bit pretentious of me deliberately making something obtuse. But it's the kind of thing, I think, with Intelligent Design and Cycle 28, I always find game designers like our games because they kind of get what we were going for. So Cycle 28 was meant to be this really kind of visceral, kind of moment to moment feedback, and really push that. And then I guess Making It Home is really the first game we thought about properly. And that was a discussion we had. You had the idea for Making It Home. I don't even know if you joined. We were talking about it possibly before.
I definitely joined by then, because we were quite deep into Cycle 28 when the first inklings of what comes next was, because Cycle 28, game development is all consuming at the best of time, but when we're trying to juggle other things as well, Cycle 28 was full on. for a shorter period of time than making it home has been, because making it home is a bigger project. But we were certainly, you're always thinking about what's next. It's hard to stop the brain doing that, especially if you're a creative individual. So we were thinking about talking about kind of at the end of Cycle 28 meetings. It was often, it'd be really cool to think about this, and for the next game we might want to try something like that. And I think we'd kind of come up with this concept of a journey that appealed to both of us. And it kind of started there, and that's a very broad concept, but this idea of ended up becoming the title of the game, kind of trying to make it home from something, and it kind of sprangboard from there. I think
as well, like it's quite useful. It's almost therapeutic, kind of talking about this. I realized as well that each project was kind of, in my head, we were trying to solve problems with the previous one. So like with Cycle 28, something I found with intelligent design was I couldn't make cool GIFs. and that, like, that's how you market games. So I was like, I need to make something that can like have cool GIFs in it. And then what we found with Cycle 28 was trying to find a target like YouTuber or Twitch streamer to play it, right? Or it's such a broad, it's like, hey, do you like games? Do you like fun? Okay, maybe you like that. Whereas when we were thinking about making it home, Dave, you'd noticed that streamers were playing games where you build things, and so it was like, that was kind of hard to do.
I have a distinct memory of trawling through YouTube game streams and just trying to find anything that looked even remotely like Cycle 28, which is really, for those who haven't seen the game before, is like a retro 2D arcade shooter game, right? Like in space. And that, don't get me wrong, that's got an audience and a number of streamers who love that kind of stuff, and the shmup community and all that kind of stuff. But I, again and again and again, I was coming across channels that describe themselves as just casual, family-friendly building game channels, and like there were thousands of them with serious follower numbers and subscribers and then stuff like that. So I was like, wow, okay, this is obviously a massive part of the market that, kind of we dipped into on our stream and games that we like to play, but perhaps hadn't really appreciated just how enormous this was. So maybe like the short answer, which we will have to summarize every one of our long rambling answers with, is the short answer was it started as a GIF-based design process and then moved to perhaps a considering streamer-based design process, and that's probably not a very cool answer, but it's something that we've really thought a lot about, because once you've got the core design of a game and you're working up all the different elements of it, what we find that takes so much time and effort and energy is that marketing side of it. So why not think about that at the start of the process rather than just be like, right, I've got a game now, where am I gonna make some noise about it?
No, that's interesting, and definitely not what I thought you were gonna talk about there. That's fascinating.
Speaking of Cycle 28, that was nominated for a BAFTA in 2019. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Thanks. What was it like to be nominated for making a video game and going to a video game awards ceremony?
Terrifying.
Yeah.
I only imagine.
And expensive.
Yeah, terrifying and expensive. I think, but the great thing is I now have a really good joke every time I show a picture of us wearing those suits, is I can say, and those suits cost more than we made. It's mind blowing. Like I don't know where to even start. Like it was such an amazing experience. Like Dave mentioned about imposter syndrome. You kind of feel like, I think we've always felt like we are a small company, and it feels like, it's almost like I feel like I'm a hobbyist. I don't, I feel like sometimes we're pretending, and then to get that kind of recognition, then you realize, oh, actually, like, people know who we, at least in Wales is a really nice, friendly community, and we love it here because of that. And then you start to realize, like, oh, people are really rooting for us, and that felt really good. And
It was.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things to bear in mind as well was UK-wide BAFTAs have a particular games BAFTA, don't they? Now, I mean, yeah. Whereas what we were nominated for was the BAFTA Cymru. So we were in a ceremony where there was one games category, and the rest of the ceremony, the rest of the evening, was film and TV, which was. Was like very much stepping into a different world. Exciting because we recognize some of the faces from film and TV.
Anthony Hopkins was like nominated for something on the same thing we were at.
So which was I think that was slightly what was like mind blowing about it, and could only have heightened our imposter syndrome because we were literally stepping into that world that was really film and TV with games. Kind of added on, but that I found was super interesting for us anyway, just to be kind of seeing that, and so it was really great. And then as Sean said, it's it's about that just brief recognition of actually like what we're doing here isn't just toiling away in our own offices, like exists out there, and some people will see it. And I think it did give some extra exposure to Cycle 28, which was certainly no bad thing for that game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Sean, you spoke a little bit about some of the challenges you faced in releasing on Steam. I wondered what other invisible boundaries are there to game developers when you go into releasing a product or even just running a studio. There's a lot of back-end work that has to take place, and I think a lot of people often overlook or don't realize that it isn't just a coder and an artist going crazy at a keyboard for a few months.
You'll hear a lot of like indie developers saying, like, mentioning hats and having like about 10 different hats they have to wear. I'm gonna just go through a list in my head. So the first one that kind of comes up in my mind is accounts and actually running a business. So one of the key things that I think, if you're listening and you're kind of, this is something you're interested in doing, it's very important to get people on board who are experts in things to do with accountants and taxes and stuff, because you can't get that wrong. Like, you just can't. So that's something, like, we have some great accountants, which I know is not a particularly exciting thing to talk about, but it's like we do. And but that's a thing I have to do. And especially before Dave joined, like, it was something where I found I had a short amount of time on a weekend, right? So like I'm a lecturer in the week, and then I've got 2 days to do Pillbug stuff and also walk my dog, spend time with my wife, see my friends, actually play computer games myself. So, for me, I'd see value, coding time was really valuable, but I'd sit down at my desk and I'd be like, oh, I should probably post a GIF on Twitter. If I'm not making noise, there's no point in me doing this. Oh, it'd really help actually if I did a blog as well. So I write a blog post. And then it's like, oh, I need to do the accounts. Go on, like, I need to type in some stuff to get the accounts all working. Oh, someone's messaged me on the Discord. I need to reply to that. Otherwise, I'll be accused of being like not a responsive dev. Someone's put a forum post on Steam. If we don't reply, people will say we're a dead game and they'll stop buying it. It's all those demands that, like, you would normally have like a community manager who'd be doing that, or you'd have a marketing team who'd be doing that. And even just like trying to be part of communities as well is you want to, to start with, I was trying to be very active in the game development subreddit, and just reading stuff about marketing and thinking about your mailing list and how I can, I need to keep telling people what to do. And by the time you've done all that stuff, you're like, oh, I've got, an hour for coding. Like, I've not actually sat down and started coding yet. And so yeah, I think it's all those number of things you've got to do, and it always feels like there's something else you could be doing and should be doing, and it's even things like cutting a trailer, learning how to do video editing and doing that, and recording gameplay, like that takes ages. And again, that's like other things you've got to do. Kind of, I'm not sure if they're challenges or just individually. None of them are particularly. Some of them are not overly challenging. But it's like you've just got so many of these little things to do and manage.
The biggest piece of advice I'd give anyone who's thinking of starting an indie game studio is, I mean, God, there's so many things to say, but in relation to this would be like, when you are thinking of building a team that obviously can't be too big. It's got to be, you've got to keep it, reasonable kind of sense of scope and scale. But try as much as you can to find individuals that have that array of skills and also interests. It's not just that they can do it, but they will want to do it and to some extent enjoy doing that. So like Sean mentioned, a community manager, I think that's probably someone who's interested in kind of the PR side of games, the marketing side, and the community manager. Already that's 3 kind of different roles, really. Like a AAA studio would have many different people doing those different roles, but an indie studio is probably going to have one person who is that individual, who probably maybe has a voice in the design process, but really is that side of the business. And that person, really is invaluable, and they become a huge asset to any given studio. And I think there's just a basic assumption that a coder will do that, or your artist will do that, or someone who's doing a bit of writing will do that for you. And I think as an industry, I think it does now start to give enough credit to those individuals and understand how important they are to the success of any one project. But I think if you're coming up through the industry, it's easy to not realize that and just assume, oh, you'll do it because you're the one coding or you're the one doing the art for the game. And I think if you're not naturally inclined that way, it quickly becomes a chore, and it quickly becomes something you put off doing, and you won't do. You'll do it very poorly, or you just won't bother doing it.
I would say the biggest challenge and our kind of like nemesis is different storefronts having different aspect ratios of the art.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good barrier. Yeah,
that's hours and hours of work. It's just nuts. Yeah.
The last thing I do want to add there, in terms, because you talked about invisible barriers that we might not. People say that this is a very cheap industry to get into, like the software is largely free, blah, blah, blah. But I think there are some hidden costs that I think would surprise some folks in terms of just startup capital. Now, compared to many, many other like industries, it is still very cheap to get into. But I mean, the thing that I often wonder about, like that kind of those small barriers, they're small financial barriers, but they do add up, and they do they are barriers. They are stopping some people going through. So the one that immediately comes to mind is the Switch dev kit that you have to pay to get. And for some studios, that's their entire annual income just gone on a dev kit. So they have to think long and hard about whether or not they can do that. So there are some startup costs that you might not necessarily think about, even though Steam these days is so relatively easy and cheap to get onto.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting thing to kind of just shed a bit of light on, because like you said, there's a perception that it's like, oh, I'll make an indie game. I'm one person, I know how to code, or I can get some asset. You know what I mean? There's a perception that it's easy when in fact it is quite challenging, and there are a lot of things you have to consider.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think not in exactly the same arena, but Matt and I have had a small taste, an amuse-bouche maybe, of the stuff that surrounds, I guess, just we're making content in a way. So yeah, we've got a little bit of that. The indie game dev community is quite an interesting one, because there's, I guess it's two parts equal of competition and camaraderie. What do you think about other studios, and how do you think that you're perceived by other studios?
This is a really interesting question. I'd like to see that. Yeah. Okay. Go on, Sean. You dive in.
So I guess it is a super interesting question, and my take on it, or my feelings, are that there is no competition. Some people, I think, are very much in. People just have, obviously everyone has like a different points of view and stuff, but some people have this idea that if someone buys your game, they're not buying my game, which is like, all data shows that is not the case. Is that if someone likes your game, they're probably and my game's similar, they're probably going to buy both if they both look interesting. Like, I'm speaking massive like generalization here, because obviously not everyone can do that, but there's so many people on Steam. Like, the number of people who have Steam accounts is just, you cannot. The first time I opened the store page of Intelligent Design and saw my Google Analytics, like, I couldn't fathom the number of people who were on that page suddenly. there's so many people. So I would say you're not really competing. And I think one thing that's important to me is a sense of community. And I think that the way that we like to run Pillbug is we do a stream every week where we play games, and we kind of use that as a way of playing other indie games. We don't always play indie games, but we do, and we pay for those games, and we want to try and kind of showcase them. We've not got many people. We've got an awesome group of people who come every week, and they do buy the games we show often, and like I feel quite good about that. And sometimes we'll play a game and a developer will come on and kind of watch, but I like doing that kind of thing. I sometimes worry, like with the kind of like how do other studios see you question. There's an issue. So as Dave said, like you can get onto Steam really easy, right? So you can just pay 100 quid. Anyone can pay 100 quid and get a game on Steam. Like, there are Unity tutorials on Steam. And every so often you're like, am I part of that problem? Like sometimes I'm like, yeah, we are. There's no question. We're very, very small and not, we don't have a massive budget, and we're taking up space on the store, and maybe that's a bad thing. But like we tend to sit around the median of games on Steam. So there's like a huge number of games that sell like no copies at all. And so sometimes I wonder if people look at us and see that, but I don't know, more recently I just don't care. I think you just as you kind of both as you grow as a human being, but also I think as Pillbug grows, you kind of care less about that. I don't know, I'm rambling, Dave. What do you think?
No, yeah, dive in. Yeah, I'll save you. Don't worry. I agree, like with 99% of what Sean just said, and I'll avoid echoing it. I think there is a degree of competition once you reach a certain size and scale, and I think it's easy for us to say, oh no, there's no such thing. You're looking at it wrong if it's competition. But I think if people. If you're a big indie studio, like what I suppose some people call triple I's or whatever, and you've got a team of 10, 20, 30, 100 people, whatever, and all their livelihoods are relying on a project's doing well, then I think a sense of competition is inevitably going to come in. And your success has a real sense of stake to it. So I think that end of the indie game community is cutthroat and is as competitive as the AAA kind of end of the spectrum. But I think where we are, which is kind of much smaller, much more nimble, fewer people involved, fewer people with like direct financial lifelines at stake, I think there's space there to kind of emphasize that camaraderie and be more about that side of things. And it does make good business sense, as Sean was saying, because people do gravitate towards those same kind of games. Whenever we pop up on someone else's more like this kind of feed on Steam, that's brilliant. We love that. That's great. Like that's extra visibility for our game, and conversely, extra kind of visibility for whoever's on our more like this.
Yeah, and like we're in a actually in a Steam bundle. Intelligent Design, our first game, is a God game, and someone I'd never met. I had this email from someone saying, "Hey, we've spoke to Valve and we suggested making this God game bundle. Would you like to be in?" And we make quite a bit of money off that, and well, at least it's extending the tail of our first game. And lots of people buy it and don't even play our game. Like they just buy the bundle and we get our cut, and then and that's really nice. And it's a nice kind of co-op thing, right? We're all benefiting. Like they could have been. I can't see that, and not every industry would be like that. I don't think.
The other thing I'd last just say about other studios perceiving us, I mean, that's kind of that's not something we think hugely about, but occasionally you get a little bit of feedback on. And the one thing that I think is interesting and worth bringing up is that when we did get Cycle 28 onto Switch, that was, I think, just at the point where Switch was getting a bit full in terms of indie games, or like the kind of floodgates had kind of opened. And again, this is what Sean's saying, when we are often grappling with this idea of, are we part of the problem? Because it doesn't really feel like we're part of the solution to the glut of games on any given storefront. But even though that was kind of happening around the time that Cycle 28 launched on Switch, there was still a perception, especially within the kind of Welsh games industry, that like that was a mark of prestige. Like that was a kind of an extra barrier, that if you got through and onto a game onto Switch, like that was quite a big deal. Like, not everyone was doing that. And even though we didn't end up selling tons and tons of copies on Switch, it felt like that was in some ways legitimizing for Pillbug in a way that just releasing on Steam wasn't.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of strange. Like, you on Twitter in particular, you find that, you know, developers all kind of post using the screenshot Saturday hashtag, and like you'll end up, because if you start developing your game at the same time as someone else, you'll see them kind of doing it about the same time as you. So that you seeing them every week, and you're liking their post, they're liking yours, and you get this kind of like, you end up just trying to support each other, trying to, like, you know, push each other and kind of signal boost each other, and that's really nice. We've had a few people who've will just send me a direct message on Twitter to say, hey, I saw you got on Switch. That's amazing. Well done, you know? And like, I'll do the same to them when I see one of their games has done well. And it feels nice. And I feel similar. I have a similar feeling towards like YouTubers we've worked with a lot, and how maybe, particularly when we were small, like when I was like this weird, odd looking God game, a few small YouTubers picked it up and played it. And now those YouTubers are actually quite big and well, bigger. Like they're still, you know, they get decent numbers, and they always play our games, and whatever we do, because they appreciate that we helped them then. I really like that feeling. I think it's a very nice, for me. I mean, I don't know, like people feel what they want to feel, but like I could only approach a business that way. I couldn't be this kind of ultra competitive kind of mindset. Just doesn't fit with me. I prefer that kind of, I'm part of this community, we're all trying to get up, so let's just help each other.
Yeah, the indie dev community does have that feel about it. You know, everyone's trying to elevate each other, and it's refreshing in the hyper competitive corporate world.
Yeah.
So rubber banding from indie studios to AAA studios, who often have a reputation for stagnation and a lack of innovation, with the recent focus being on monetization and microtransactions. How do you feel about these emerging trends in game development, and do you think that smaller studios should take cues from their larger counterparts, and do you take any cues from AAA studios?
I mean, I made some notes ahead of this, and my big note for this is just absolutely not. Like, that was my, I don't know if Sean feels quite differently, but I don't think indies should take, I'm going to take a stand on this a little bit, and you know, it's a bit more extreme than I might be otherwise, but I don't think we should. I think, to me, the part of the glory of indie studios is that you have a space to add variety to kind of the art form of computer games. You can innovate, you can be nimble, you still have to manage your finances, obviously, but you can buck trends, you can explore new space. And I think you have a question later that ties into this, so we'll come back to that. But I think indie games is slightly, for me, part of the reason they are gaining the success and interest that they do is that they are not doing they're not just AAA light. They're exploring other things in gaming, and that's kind of what people who regularly buy indie games, they're just looking for something different.
So I kind of like have a similar but different view on that. So I don't think I agree with the idea that AAA studios don't innovate. So, and part of that maybe comes from, I am very consciously, maybe I've just kind of like blanked out the studios that aren't, and they almost like don't exist to me, so I don't even consider them as existing. But like I get, like, you know, you look at the Maddens of the world, and those kind of, I would normally describe them as like dude bro games, and I love dude bro games. Don't get me wrong, I my most played game is like Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. I love that stuff. And they do they really do innovate. It's just, I guess, in the question you're kind of talking about the monetization and stuff, right?
Yeah, I drew particular attention to that kind of aspect. Seems to be prevailing at the moment.
So the kind of like games as a service type stuff?
Yeah.
Do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in a way, like, the game I'm playing the most of at the moment is Destiny 2, which is absolutely like a game as a service. But like, I feel like that's done in a respectful way. Like, I don't think it's done in a way that I feel like they're getting one over on me. Like I happily pay this for the season pass every season, and I feel like I get something out of that. But maybe it's the more kind of like maybe the FIFAs or stuff. There's probably some of this happening, but I guess I don't see it so much.
You can't see it because you've been brainwashed, Sean.
Maybe I'm the problem. But I guess the last AAA game I played was Last of Us 2, and I was blown away by some of the stuff that was done in that. What I often take from those games is I like think, right, this game made me feel something. How did it make me feel that? And can we learn anything from that at the kind of crazy tiny scale we're working at? More, I think. And even like I take a lot from even like playing Destiny, like trying to think about like, why am I finding this rewarding? And I don't think it's just because they've worked out a really good reward schedule that has tricked my reptilian brain into like the button. I think there's something more to it, and like trying to see how their kind of loot system works, and that's quite interesting. Hopefully I made some sense in that rambling statement, but I quite like AAA games, I guess is my honest kind of like, maybe I shouldn't admit that, but you know.
I think AAA games are generally good, and I suppose the reason I drew attention to the lack of innovation is just for people who have been gaming for quite some time, there are certain mechanics and themes that tend to crop up an awful lot, and have almost become like a crutch. And you know, one example of that would be your open world towers. You know, as soon as something works in a game, a studio will use it ad infinitum.
I was about to say exactly that. There was a car game, I think it was Ubisoft, because every Ubisoft game has you going to a tower and unlocking a bit of the map.
Was it Rage that we're thinking of?
Rage? No, it was just a driving game. There was this open world where everyone was driving around in these cars that had no drivers in. And then like to unlock more of the map, you'd have to drive and up to this tower, and it was like, oh yeah, that's the Ubisoft thing. It's like basically Assassin's Creed but with 4 wheels. But yeah, I think you're right.
I think though, like, and this is something I always do, which is a problem, that like linking this back to the book world. Like, I think computer games, compared to a lot of other creative industries, are still very much in their infancy, or maybe we could say adolescence, as a kind of, as an art form, as an expression, as an industry, as a business, as a hobby. You know, however you want to describe it. It is still relatively new, and I think we're in a situation now where the money is such, the interest is such, the player base is such that, you know, you are going to see commercial trends emerge and dominate and be replicated in a way that, you know, we've seen in the music industry, in the art world, and in the book world, definitely. And you know, that happens for a while, and those trends will be replicated and enjoyed en masse. And they're, like Sean says, there kind of will be some form of innovation, the next big equivalent of moving into microtransactions, or the next big, you know, tower opens map experience. You know, like there will be, or open worlds will kind of die a death, and a big new thing will come along. And I think, I think that's all just a natural part of the process. Now, I understand how that can sometimes feel like it's moving at a slower pace than things like indie games, which feel like they're trying new things every other week because they are much more nimble. So yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of going to be part of the landscape for quite a long time as a process, even if the specifics are changing.
It's weird for me because I used to be able to tell you the release date of games months in advance, and I knew what was coming out. And when I didn't know better, I might have pre-ordered games. But now I don't know what's coming. Like, I have no idea what's coming out next year. And I think it might be actually part of this thing that you're saying is like, really, nothing's coming out that's making me interested. I'm just playing my Destiny 2 and I'm loving it. You know? Like, and there'll be some new maps. And it's a chat room to chat with my friends. Like, I guess maybe for me, what gaming is has changed. And that maybe I'm not even considering those big AAA experiences anymore.
I'm kind of quietly waiting for battle royales to go away, but
yeah,
that might be a bit of an unpopular opinion for a few people. But
well, they'll have their time, man. Like they arguably they already have, right? So I think you're not alone in waiting for the next big thing.
Being that you're both lecturers, you're probably used to thinking long and hard about certain topics and challenges. Do you think there's a risk for smaller studios to over intellectualize a product in order to have some kind of unique selling point?
That's again a great question. Given already how much we've rambled on about different topics, you probably appreciate that. Yeah, for us, it's definitely a risk. When I read that question, I thought, well, yes, that is 100% something that indie games and indie studios do need to have a sense of. But I mean, the more I thought about it, and Sean will have a different answer, which would be great. That for me, I think I always link this to kind of what do you need for your game to do in order for your studio to survive. And in that sense, if you are comfortable and able to keep going as a studio without selling lots and lots of units, then I think go ahead and over intellectualize to your heart's content, like to produce a product that you're happy with as much as possible. I think the observable USP is just a massive crapshoot, right? Like I think we all think we have observable USPs. Like otherwise we wouldn't really be making the games that we make. I think if you're midway through the process thinking, well, this doesn't look particularly unique and looks like every other game then you probably will jettison that project and try something else. So I think you like at some level we all think our game is a perfect unique snowflake, but I think that's necessarily no bad thing as long as you are aware of what you need your game to do in terms of finances. That's my feeling on that. Sean, have you got
something I've been kind of slowly accepting over the past maybe 2 or 3 years in every part of my life, really. So like with lecturers, if people don't know, part of my job as a lecturer is to do academic research and publish papers, and that often means coming up with an idea and doing something. And something that I've been telling a lot of PhD students, and because I spent a long time telling myself, is that actually everything you make is going to be unique because you have your experiences that you've been through that is unique to you. So what you create is going to be unique, and that you can't keep worrying about, there are other games that you're building a vehicle. We've come at our game through our way, that is because we've had the experiences in our lives we have the skills we have the interests we have, and so we created something that is unique. Like just because like a fingerprint's unique, it might be even a clone, right? Even if you deliberately clone a game, unless you are copying the code, you will make something different. What's kind of more important is, do you have a hook to get someone in and that's easily recognizable to someone to know that that's something I'll be interested in? And so I think people maybe can get too obsessed with this idea of making something unique and weird, and actually that doesn't necessarily sell very well, because people are like, well, that's weird, I don't know what that is, I don't know if that's something I'm going to like, so I'll wait until there are some reviews. But then everyone's thinking that, so there'll never be any reviews. And unless you've got a massive marketing budget, or you're like, if you are a company, if you're Jonathan Blow, or if you're someone who, if you already have a reputation, you can make weird stuff. If you actually made something unique, if you actually made something with a unique selling point, I don't necessarily think that would sell overly well. People prefer to buy things that are familiar to them. So yes, there is a danger that people can overthink about that.
I mean, sure. I think everything in this industry is a risk of overthinking it. Like, I think there is 100% that if you're natural, that's your natural inclination with anything. Like, even like Sean was saying, choose a good accountant. You could spend months overthinking that, let alone anything in the design process. So yeah, like you have to at some point make those decisions. And as Sean said, the fact that you are making them will help provide that USP. But I think, as Sean said, like the hook aspect is really a really good point. Like, I think if you are looking to produce some kind of avant-garde artistic experience, then great, crack on with whatever it is you're doing. But if you're looking to sell games, then you need to be thinking about what your market is and how they're going to come at your game, and that hook and that idea of familiarity, and it being able to say, oh, it's like Luftrausers in space, that really helped people understand what Cycle 28 was.
So, Making It Home has some fairly fantastical elements, i.e. playing a ladybird piloting a Rube Goldberg train, paired with some fairly grounded story beats. The protagonist is making it home for their child's birthday. A lot of games don't deal with the potential disparity between a character's actions and gameplay and their story. What do you think could be done to challenge ludo-narrative dissonance in games, considering, in my humble opinion, it's done very well in Making It Home?
Well, firstly, thank you for saying that. Sean, do you want to jump in initially and talk about this, and then I'll kind of come in as the talking more from the story's perspective? Or
my answer is going to be I have no idea.
Okay.
So, only that like it's something that's really interesting, and I notice more and more. Like I said, I played The Last of Us, and I think The Last of Us 2 is a good example of them doing this. They use that ludo-narrative dissonance, I don't know if I pronounced that right, to make you feel something. And I don't, because it's not been out very long, so I don't want to give specifics, but they do some stuff in that game. They know, like the Uncharted series have always been the example for this, of like, you know, you're Nathan Drake, happy-go-lucky guy who is a mass murderer, just murders hundreds and hundreds of people. And so Naughty Dog kind of obviously know that, and it's, you know, they know they're the textbook example of that, like literally. I'm sure they deliberately used that in Last of Us 2 to say something, and I think they did it really well. I don't think everyone spotted that, depending on how you approach these things, but I think in the simplest terms, they make you feel bad about killing people. I think that's what I got from the game anyway.
Mm-hmm. I think we approach this, so I'll start by saying like how we approach this, and then maybe spiral out a little bit and how talk more broadly about how I think there, you know, things could be done to kind of challenge that dissonance. We approach this, I think, and by tackling it head on, and I think that's kind of what you were saying, Sean, about like The Last of Us 2, is that there's that kind of idea of put a lamp on it, you know, put a lampshade on it, make it a feature, you know, stop trying to hide this thing that exists and actually kind of tackle it head on. And for me, like coming into writing for games as I have through that prose approach, like it was always going to be part of this experience, because writing for games is far more collaborative than fiction, where I have pretty much almost complete control over something. So we think a lot about how a story is going to respond to the core gameplay loop, even though they're like, we as an indie game developer feel that dissonance very strongly, because, you know, we're not able to just, we'll run a quick time event here that's like half cutscene, half gameplay experience, that are going to merge those two, however you feel about those kinds of devices. You know, like Cycle 28 was very much kind of static text. I'm glad you liked the way Making It Home approaches it, but, you know, really it's a dialogue tree in a separate gameplay loop environment than the main Rube Goldberg train gameplay loop. So like we know that there's that dissonance, and I think initially we get away with it a little bit in some of our games that don't involve shooting, because I think that's the one that people are most aware of, like Sean was saying. But we kind of tackle it head on, and we try and make it interesting and different, because we give those things layers. We give our story layers. There's hidden depths to what's going on in the story, and I think that benefits a lot from that weirdness that we've generated by using animal characters that are talking about things, like you say in the question, that are kind of really quite grounded and very human and personable. So we haven't just got the ludo narrative dissonance of the gameplay loop versus what I'm writing about. We've also got kind of a very visual character-based dissonance as well. It's like, this rabbit's being a real nasty person to my ladybird, so how do I feel about that? Or people are always surprised that the ladybird's sister is a rabbit in the first place, so that's generating some kind of strange narrative dissonance as well. So I think we've jumped both feet into that idea and said, like, we're interested in this, so we're going to explore it. I think that's what other games like Last of Us 2 are doing now. And I think like that idea of games evolving as a storytelling platform, you know, they're not trying to hide this thing that players are experiencing, this kind of concept of that dissonance. They're actually leaning into it and exploring it and seeing what it can do as kind of a fruitful way of creating content and kind of creating feelings and exploring that. So I think it's it's something that not every game is going to kind of tackle, and it certainly doesn't need to. But I think it's something that if you're developing your own games and you're thinking, oh god, like how can my story interact with this core gameplay loop, I think it's just as interesting to explore that feeling as a dissonance and not just try and smooth it over as much as possible as well. Like I think there's two very different options there, and I'm sure there are many others that we haven't come across or thought about.
That's good advice at the end there. So we've spoken about your beginnings and how you've got yourselves moving as a games company. What do you feel the future is for Pillbug?
Well, if we're true to our form, it won't be anything like what we've done before.
I don't know. Like it all depends on what happens with the game we're working on now, I think. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, from a financial sense, it certainly does. You know, because I think it's fine to say that our game's budget is basically based on the previous game's earnings. You know, so like Cycle 28 paid for us to do some of the things we wanted to do with Making It Home, which includes things like an expanded soundtrack, an expanded art kind of profile for the game. So if Making It Home kind of continues to let us expand in those areas, then great. That's what we'll look to do. I think it, like Sean says, it really does depend on Making It Home. And if Making It Home does do particularly well, then we might stop and think about how we can, do that thing that we should do and make the next kind of Make It Home game.
I think that's it. I think it's more, in a lot of ways, we're kind of still finding our identity, and we're building a community. And like, what I'm finding really useful about having a Discord, seeing the games people who have joined our Discord play. And getting a sense of what kind of games they like, and thinking, well, why don't we make those kind of games? Because clearly, all the people that are already interested in our stuff like those sort of games. But also, then we have this issue of like, some people like that we make a different game every. Like people kind of are interested in that as well. But
is that our USP?
Is that our thing? But no. That's not a way to make money. I don't think. Like, I guess the very simple answer is hopefully another game. But it does, because for us, we are working kind of release to release. And a lot of kind of our goal is to build as a company a passive income by having a backlog of games that then can make money. And yes, we make most of our money in like the first week or whatever of a launch, and then it tails off. But, we're trying to build that back catalogue to kind of give us some breathing room.
5 tails are better than 1, basically. Yeah,
that's exactly. And so it kind of weirdly depends as well on that. It's like there's a weird question of like, what do we do next? Maybe do we port Making It Home to a console? And that's a really hard question, because like, say about releasing it onto Switch. That's like, we've already got a Switch development kit, and we could do that, but that's a lot of work. That's quite difficult. It is difficult work. Porting a game is hard. And actually, you kind of need a really big audience to do well on Switch. Steam has the best discoverability of all the platforms. That's your best bet for doing well. And a lot of the other platforms, you need that big audience to even get noticed. And then you can maybe say to Nintendo, hey, we sold this many units on Steam. How about like making a feature when we launch? And that's the only way you really sell any kind of significant amount of copies. So maybe if we do really well with Making It Home on Steam, that might mean, okay, let's stick with this for a bit. And, it probably makes business sense to port it somewhere. So yeah, it's hard to plan, I guess.
Good to hear that you're planning on making more games, though, if you can.
Well, I think those are all the big questions we have. We'd like to finish on a bit of a lighter note. So we've got some quick fire questions. So we give you 2 options. If one of you wants to answer first, and then the other one after. Sean, do you want to go first?
Yeah.
Okay, so ping is at you. Just say the first of the two that is the more appealing. Summer or winter?
Winter.
Summer.
Pizza or burgers?
Pizza.
Pizza.
Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Coffee.
Physical or digital?
Digital.
Digital.
Dogs or cats?
Dogs.
Cats.
The last question is always how I judge people because I'm a dog person, but Matt,
No.
I'm a cat person.
opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us today and chatting with us about your experiences and
Yeah, we really
dropping
appreciate
some
it.
knowledge on us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us.
Is there anything you want to say about Pillbug Games or where people can find Making It Home or anything else that that's come out from Pillbug, or how people can follow you on Twitch?
Yeah, we are pretty much everywhere: Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, etc. If you the one-stop shop is www.pillbug.zone, which you can find links to everywhere. But yeah, we are Pillbug Int on Twitch as well. If you want to go straight there.
And we stream on Tuesdays at 8 p.m. British summertime. We play all sorts.
Awesome. Wow.
Cool.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks for joining us, guys.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.